Hi, and welcome everyone to Ethereal Encounters Unveiled. Today we are broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 on the Gulf Coast and 107.7 FM in beautiful New Orleans. Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And today we are not live. It is a Friday show, and this is a pre-recorded show. But as I mentioned in some of my other intros, we are opening up Fridays as well for live shows because we have so many wonderful guests that want to be a part of this network. And in addition to my Thursday live at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'm also going to be doing a lot more lives on Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So yes, I'm so excited about that. And again, welcome to Ethereal Encounters Unveiled. Today we're broadcasting on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 on the Gulf Coast and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. Please be sure and leave your comments and questions, and I'm sure that my lovely guest today will be able to answer them for you. So, exciting topic today. If you've ever felt a prickle of fear walking past a dimly lit antique shop, or if the music cue for Chucky still gives you the chills, then you're in the right place. Today, we're talking about objects that stare back sometimes, which is totally creepy and scary, but we love it. Our guest today, Fiona Dodwell, didn't just write a book about possessed toys. She conducted a masterful investigation into the entire phenomenon, and she explored everything from real-life alleged curses like Mandy and Okiku to Hollywood and how they create the most terrifying doll villains we all know about, Chucky and others. So her new book, called The Dark and Disturbing Cursed Collection of Haunted Dolls, is a deep dive into the history, folklore, and genuine fear inspired by these inanimate figures. So get ready to discover what happens when a childhood toy becomes a living, breathing vessel for something much darker. So let's welcome Fiona Dodwell.
Hello.
Fiona.
Hi.
So nice to have you.
Thank you for having me on.
Yes, so excited. So dolls intrigue all of us. We all get the creeps from them. Even the most pleasant looking dolls can sometimes give you the chills and an uncomfortable feeling. And it's funny because the only doll I have was one that was given to me when I was about 5. And it was one of those Little Women dolls. I don't know if you remember that. They were called Little Women.
Little Women.
And yeah, and it just, I don't know, it just gave me an uncomfortable feeling. So I put it in a plastic bag and hid it away in a drawer. But it's just one of those things. And she's the cutest thing ever, but I just, can't vibe with it. And that's not the only thing. It's not only dolls, it's other toys as well, obviously. So I read your book and I absolutely loved it. It was such a good, comprehensive guide about all different types of dolls and toys and what to do, like if you're faced with something that seems creepy or haunted. So I'm going to let you talk about yourself for a little bit. Tell us who you are and how you got into all this, and take it away.
Yeah, so basically I've been into the paranormal in a sort of the general kind of subject since I was a child, really. I think I was about 9 or 10 when I started reading the point horror books, as a kid, and just enjoyed like that feeling of being scared and that creepiness. And then as I got older, I started reading sort of like Guide to Haunted Places and going for Sunday walks to graveyards, and I just loved anything that was creepy or macabre. And I just spent my whole sort of childhood and my adolescence really sort of throwing myself into the subject. And then as I got older, I just started to really go into the researching aspect of it. So I spent a lot of time reading, kind of going deep dive into cases that were some that were well known, some that weren't. I just really threw myself into it, and along the way, stories like Annabelle and Peggy the doll just really gripped me. This whole idea that it's not just a house that can be haunted, but dolls and objects too can be spirited. So that really kind of stuck with me, and I saw that there wasn't really a huge wealth of information out there on that subject. You know, we have a whole kind of array of books on hauntings and haunted properties and possession and demons and all sorts, but there was very few things out there on haunted objects. So that's when I made the decision. So I wrote my book. It's called A Cursed Collection of Haunted Dolls, and I just put everything into it, really. I just really went as far as I could, researching cases, analysing everything, looking at it from all angles, and then just putting it in a kind of a comprehensive collection so that other people that had an interest in the subject could have a look through and then decide how they feel about it at the end, sort of giving it to other people and leaving it for them to judge how they feel and where they land on believing or not.
Yeah. I'm sure that through the years of you investigating, you've had to have a lot of high strangeness things happen to you. Um, is your life filled with them, or were they just occasional? Like what has that been like for you?
For the most part, you know, especially at the beginning, it was more just that the sort of reading and researching side of things. So I wasn't like personally experiencing things in that way. It was more just me kind of learning from other people's experiences, really. But the most interesting thing to come out of writing the book itself was getting in touch with somebody who had purchased a doll, and they were actually a skeptic. This person was a skeptic, but just for a bit of out of interest, really, they'd purchased this doll and said they were going to spend 2 nights in a hotel and just see if anything would happen, do a recording and leave sort of dictaphone running overnight, see if they could pick up on anything. And the end result for this person anyway was, at the end of it, they were convinced that there was something, some energy attached to this doll, and they ended up doing something similar to your little women doll and putting it in a carrier bag and locking it in the boot of their car. As I got in contact with this person when I was writing the book, his name's Rob, and he got in contact and he said, hey, do you want to have a haunted doll and have this experience yourself while you're writing it, to get that insight? So for me, funny enough, even after all these years of researching, this was my first personal time of being up close with something like this. So I was a bit nervous about it, but I thought, well, what better way to get an understanding than to have this in my own life and my own home? And that's what happened. Rob sent me the doll, and her name's Edna, and I do write a chapter about her in the book. And I still have Edna now. Originally, she was going to only stay with me for a few weeks, but Rob was quite keen not to have her back, and said, you can keep her. So I thought, well, then I'll keep her and live with her, and then, you know, learn myself. And that's been a really eye-opening experience. I mean, obviously, we all look to things like Hollywood and films for the drama of it, and we have these expectations from film and television, and obviously the reality is different, but there is definitely something to the experience of being around an object that's haunted. So I have had a whole variety of things happen around this doll, and felt like I was able to validate through my own experience that she is haunted. So it was fascinating experiencing that and being able to put that down on paper to let readers know what it's like in your own life to have to face that.
Yeah, where is she now, the doll?
She's upstairs in another room, actually. But
Wow.
I do post about her quite a bit on some of my pages, and I've got some footage. I keep meaning to upload things like when I've caught EVP and certain things, little experiments I've done. I've had some really interesting things, like I had a little touch sensor ball, and it can only light up if you touch it. So I thought, would it be a really interesting thing to place this light on the doll? So essentially it shouldn't be lighting up unless there's a physical push to the light. And there was a whole session I had where I would speak to Edna the doll and I would ask questions, and then when I would say, could you touch the ball and make it light up, then the light would come on and it would flash. And there was a whole kind of series of times where I experienced this, where there would be a direct response to me asking
Mhm.
Edna to touch the light and turn it on. And that to me was quite validating, because it was like a direct thing, and it wasn't just
Yeah.
something that I interpreted, it was something that anyone around me could see at the same time. So there was that, like, several times I used that method. And then other times things like using EVP and dictaphone and asking questions. Like I asked Edna, can you tell me how old you are? And then a very faint childlike voice said 6, which was amazing, because it validated what I'd been told from Rob, who'd sent me the doll, that it was believed to be a child's spirit. And there were other things like cold, that feeling of kind of coldness, the cold spots that kind of become a bit cliche in this kind of field. And a tingling sensation at times when holding her. And my husband, who's pretty much like he's a skeptic. I mean, he's open-minded, but he's definitely more the skeptic end. And he's had a couple of times where he's seen a figure going past, or corner of the eye movement, to the extent that he's actually got up from the chair and looked around the house thinking somebody or something's got in.
Wow.
And that's only happened since owning Edna too. So over a period of time, I think if there's one or two things that happened, you could then think, am I looking too much into that? But if you have enough, and you can kind of collect a whole series of evidence, then I think that's when you can build a bigger picture and kind of have faith that there is something going on.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you ever concerned about, because we all know and have heard that a lot of these hauntings can be tricksters, and they can like pretend to be children. Does it ever like concern you that maybe it's not a child, or has so far it's just been really indicative that it's a child possessing the doll?
I think in the case of Edna, because of the kind of activity I've had, the way that she responded to the lights lighting up, it felt like there was quite a playful energy around her. And whenever I've heard her voice on EVP, it sounds like a very sweet childlike voice.
Yeah.
And I know what I guess in a way you could say, well, something that wanted to be deceptive would do that. But I think it's looking at the length of time I've had her and only seen that kind of thing around her, that made me think that she is who she says she is. But if over time that changed, or other things happened that were leaning more towards negative, then that's definitely something that I would look at. And I'd certainly be more nervous of having that in my home than the thought of sort of an
Yeah.
instant energy.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah. Like one of the things that, when you mention it, talk about this in your book, those Divic boxes and those things, like I've seen so many videos too, where they're just evil, you know?
Yeah,
And I think the original owner like buried it and gave it away, and it was just like so involved. I think he hid it away now, right? Or has that changed? I thought he buried it and left it there at last. Maybe you could
that's
tell folks what a Divic box is too.
yeah. I mean, it's something that I've certainly read about when sort of researching haunted objects. I mean,
Yeah.
my specialist subject is haunted dolls. That's mainly where I come from. Although I have read about the case of the Dybbuk box, and I think the complicated thing with this case is that, as you know, when you go online, there are various versions of
Yeah,
the story, so that it gets to the point that it's really hard to unravel
exactly.
which is true and which isn't. But I mean, I believe that there's been a book written about the
Hmm.
case, and there's been a documentary, and I believe that the Dybbuk box at some point, unless I'm getting confused, but I think at some point ended up in Zach Bagans' museum.
Oh, that's right. It did. I
Um,
think he bought it.
yeah, I
Yeah. Oh,
think that
that's
was. I
crazy.
think there was a burial at some point when somebody who did have it that
Yeah.
did try doing that, but I think
Yeah.
after that, when energy and the occurrences didn't particularly settle down, I think it kind of culminated in Zach Bagans reaching out and having the Dybbuk box, and I think he has it on display in his museum. And the belief is that this box, this Dybbuk box, has an energy trapped or tethered to it, and that it's
Yeah.
not a good energy. It's supposed to be something dark and demonic. But yeah, it's always something I'm always quite careful to know what to say, because because of having read so many things, I find it hard to unravel, if you know what I mean. But it's a
Oh,
fascinating
absolutely.
case, really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, I was amazed to read when I first read your book. You have a disclaimer in there.
Mhm. Yeah, it's something that I spoke about with my publisher, because at one point in the early stages of the book, we were actually planning on including photographs, actual photographs of like Peggy the doll and Harold
Mhm.
and Robert, and we were going to sort of plan about getting permission to use these photos. And then it kind of occurred to us, actually some of these dolls have been linked to quite negative things or series of bad luck. For instance, Peggy the doll, this was back in 2015. um, this doll, when it made headlines because it was supposed to be, it was discovered to be haunted and a lot of
Yeah.
negative things had happened, and the owner just didn't want it. They called in Jayne Harris, and she, in the UK, she's part of the team on Help My House is Haunted, the TV show. But at the time she was called in to take the doll away, the owner said, look, I'm convinced that this bad stuff that's happening is because of Peggy. Please take the doll away. And Jayne did, and she did her own investigations and was then convinced herself that Peggy was haunted. But once that reached the media and the mainstream media, and Peggy's face, just this innocent looking doll, made her face across newspapers and websites, there was quite a few people that were reaching out to Jayne and saying, actually, just from looking at her photo, I feel like
Oh,
I've been affected, which to me is quite a terrifying thought, that people just nowhere near the doll, but even just looking at a photo can say, oh,
yeah.
I feel ill, or I feel like I've had like bad luck, or that there's something negative since I've seen her. So we thought in the end, even though it would have been fun to include photos in terms of how the book would have looked in a sense, it just seemed too risky, because we thought, we want readers who believe in this aspect of the paranormal to want to read the book and not think, well, actually, if there's a possibility that Robert the doll, who's also known for causing a bit
Yeah.
of mischief through photos, and Peggy, we thought then it's just not worth the risk. So we put a disclaimer that researching these dolls might carry its own risk, but it's also safer perhaps not to include the photos, which is why we
Yeah.
hired an illustrator who drew pictures of the doll, and then those pictures were included instead. So I think it was more just a case of being cautious, on the off chance. It probably would have been fine, but I certainly wouldn't want to, have anything out
Yeah.
there that influenced someone in a negative way. So
Yeah, because that's not good for book sales either to
no, exactly.
to want to do that. So
Yeah.
definitely a good idea. It's also, I guess good fortune that while you were researching and doing all this, nothing affected you really, other than the doll that you got, but nothing really negative. Have you did a lot of research into haunted homes and tours and stuff and never had any effects from that as well? Or is it just dolls that you primarily researched throughout your life?
I have spent a great deal of time looking at all aspects, really, because I said it's like almost, I could say it's been a lifelong interest. So through
Yeah.
all the recent years, I've looked at everything. I've studied demonology and theology and exorcism, and
Mhm.
I've gone on regular paranormal investigations as well. I've even joined the Most Haunted team a few times over here in the UK on locations, and being able to investigate with them. So I'm definitely interested in all of it, and I have had experiences over the years, to the point where I've had that feeling before of, I'm not even somebody who considers myself sensitive really, or psychic. I don't claim to any gift that way, but I've had the experience of walking into a room and suddenly being overcome with a feeling of like, this is really bad. I feel sick. I feel
Like
suddenly
dread.
claustrophobic.
Yeah.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
sense of dread. And that to me was really linked with the property, and that was quite overwhelming, because it was the first time I'd experienced anything that felt so palpable so immediately, just from walking into
Yeah. Yeah.
a seemingly innocent room. um, and I have sort of been to places like, I remember one evening investigating, it's called the Raggedy Museum in London, and it used to be a Victorian school, and it's now opened as a museum. And I sort of went there and did an investigation, and sort of interesting doing those kind of nighttime experiments where you're doing things like calling out and trying to use your senses and trying to collect evidence. That was one of my favorite locations. So yeah, I've definitely kind of looked at the whole spectrum of things, but in my experience, I certainly haven't had anything where I felt like something awful has
Like
followed me
followed you
home.
home.
Or
Yeah.
I've not, I
Yeah.
mean, it's certainly something that's crossed my mind.
Yeah.
And I've had quite a few people say to me, you know, did I feel a bit wary writing about Robert, for example, or Annabelle, because they're often linked to bad luck. And it was in the back of my mind, you know, would I be drawing some unwanted attention there from writing it? But, you know, fingers crossed anyway. I don't want to tempt fate, but
Right.
I have had, you know, like I said, I've had experiences with Edna the doll, but I've not had something that's felt like it was threatening or negative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Plus, I'm sure you've got like grounding techniques and things you do to protect yourself. And I'm sure that that helps as well. You know, we all need to do that just on the daily, but especially if you're going to cemeteries or anything like that, it's always good to make sure that, you know, you close a session and don't invite any of those buggers in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's really important. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. You know, it also amazes me that like this genre in particular, and even with like UFOs and extraterrestrials, we have a lot of good footage before AI. Like, so you can't blame it on AI and say, well, that's fake. It's AI. Because nowadays you don't know
Mm-hmm.
what's real and what's not. But back in the day, you know, like I've watched like shows, my dog, sorry, he's a barker.
That's all right.
I've watched so many, such a fan of all the paranormal ghost shows and all of them. And, you know, those you can't really trust 100% either because they want the jump scare, you know, so they're going to propagate that. But I've seen a lot of good footage that is very believable. And yet, it's still frowned upon. Like even when you talk to people about like, and I'm sure you've experienced this, you know, your line of interest and work.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people just think it's, you know, woo-woo hogwash stuff. And do you get that still when you talk to people and tell them the kind of books that you're writing or and things like your whole past career of interest? Do you get that, or is it better now? Like, are people more accepting of it?
I think it's a mixed bag, really. It's a good question because in one way, like there's been a few conversations when people have said to me, oh, what's your new book about? And I've said, oh, it's about haunted dolls. And then there's been a few people that have given me a look like, oh, you know,
Yeah.
are you serious? You know, that they can't quite believe it. So I've had a few responses like that where there's been like genuine surprise or people think it's almost amusing. But in another way, I think to a degree, perhaps the shows like the kind of ones you're talking about have probably opened up the conversation more. So whether you're a believer
Yes.
or a skeptic, it's certainly put the subject
Yes.
of the paranormal on a wider landscape there. And
Mhm.
it's got people talking, it's got people thinking. And I suppose you're always going to get people that say, well, it's on TV, so it can't be true. Well,
Right.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I'm not going to say that, you know, that there's a complete trust in every single production out there, every single program.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that, but I'm saying just because something is on TV or there to entertain you, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have bad motives or that they're doing anything wrong either. So it's just a case of being open-minded. And one thing I've certainly appreciated with shows like that is at least you're getting to see locations explored that I would never be able to, that many other people wouldn't be able
Right.
to. So you're getting past that and getting to see places that would be a complete mystery to us otherwise. So there is that aspect to it, even from a historical perspective.
Yeah.
Some of the wonderful locations we get to see now because of these programs. But I do think, I do think there's a shift. I think people seem more open-minded, but you're always going to get people who frown upon it, either for their own beliefs. Perhaps it could be a
Mhm.
religious belief where they're not comfortable, or people who just think it's fairies at the bottom of the garden, like the people who laughed when I've said, oh, it's about haunted dolls. But I don't take that to heart. Everyone's
Oh,
coming from their own,
yes.
from their own personal experience and perspective. And in a way, I think films like, and I'm not dissing these films, I absolutely love films, horror films like Child's Play, I absolutely love them. But I do think that the entertainment side has given people almost a caricature mockery of
Hmm.
a haunted doll, So I think when people say, oh, so you're writing about a haunted doll, they're thinking of a killer doll that will
Chucky.
run around and chase you. Yeah. And as fantastic as that is on film, it's not what I'm claiming is
Yeah.
reality, if you know what I
Right.
mean. So it's a
Exactly.
whole different world, and it's a universe apart, actually, really. So
Yeah. Yeah. So you said that you've done a lot of research into like exorcisms and demonics and stuff like that, right?
hmm
Um, do you find that a lot of the are any of the dolls ever possessed by good forces where they've done like positive things or been beneficial to someone's life? Or is it always, a haunted, creepy, scary doll?
I think there's a psychological aspect to it where there are people that are just creeped out by dolls, full stop. So
Mhm.
there's an element of it where if you see a doll and you think that something paranormal is happening around it, there's a link in your mind that's quite easy to go to of that's scary, that's
Right.
creepy, that's wrong. Whereas I think that's a conclusion that you can jump to without it necessarily being negative.
Mhm.
So for, having read so many cases, you mean there are cases, of course, that you will have heard of, like Peggy and Robert the doll, which did have a negative aspect to it. But there are just as many cases out there of dolls that were haunted, and they were just happy, regular
Yeah.
spirits of people that were just like you and me, who are still here and are just trying to express themselves. And that for quite a lot of the time, the fear that we're interpreting is actually just because we're experiencing something of the unknown, and not because there's an intention of scaring us from the spirit themselves. So I
Yeah.
think it's
That's so
important to
true.
remember that distinction, that dolls can look creepy, and Hollywood has done a good job of making us see them as creepy as well, which I understand. But I think it's always just good to remind ourselves that activity around something, whether it's a doll or an antique or a house, just because there is activity, it doesn't necessarily have to be interpreted as a negative thing. I think you have to take that on a case by case basis.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I saw I think it was a TV show where they had this one restaurant and people would bring dolls with them and like big dolls, almost like the size of a child, and they would put them next to the like on the lunch table and treat them almost like people and get them
Really?
lunch. Yeah, it was the most it just stood with me because it almost reminded me of like how you create a trope, how you put your energy into something and make it real. So like I'm wondering if and you do a beautiful job in your book of, historically, like going back to the how dolls were created and the types of dolls that there were. So that was really interesting. But I'm just wondering too if in the making of a doll, if since it's such a creative endeavor, well, maybe not so much anymore. They're probably all
Mass
manufactured
produced.
mechanically.
hmm
But I would say for like a doll maker, you're sitting there and you're working endless hours on this doll and you're creating something from nothing, and maybe that person is like putting that energy into the doll, whether it's good or bad energy. I mean, have you
hmm
ever run into stories like that too, like from a doll maker that created a haunted doll? Or
I haven't specifically come into contact with that directly, but what you're saying does tie into one of the theories about how a doll can be haunted, because
right.
there are a few theories out there, and one of the theories is the stone tape theory, which is basically when something around you, whether it's the land or a house or an object like a doll, can absorb the energy. And I think it's possible that if somebody is either been the creator of a doll and has spent hours and hours, months perhaps, creating something,
Mm-hmm.
and they're putting so much of their time and their energy and their focus and their passion, probably they love what they're doing, I think it is possible that some of that energy absorbs into what they're doing.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, I think because human beings are drawn to dolls, we have a fascination. As you said in the book, I explore them back to their history, and there was discoveries as early as 2000 BCE and ancient
Mm-hmm.
Egyptian tombs. People are drawn to dolls. As humans, we are drawn because of them being human looking. They're very human-like vessels. They have eyes, faces. So
Yeah.
that is one of the theories too, is that if there is a spirit and that there is an ability of spirit to inhabit or link to an object, no matter what that reason might be, we might not necessarily understand why, but it would make sense that a child or a grown-up, whoever they are, might want to link with a human-looking vessel more than they would something else that's lying around. That just to me makes sense, if you know what I mean. If there's a child and they see a doll that looked like them, or a doll that they looked like when they were,
Yeah.
like looked like them, resembled them, or perhaps looked like a doll that they owned when they were a child, perhaps. I think there's something to that, to someone being drawn to something that is a human-like thing, that has arms, legs, a face, hair, and that kind of a representation of the human form might be why a spirit's drawn to inhabit or be connected to an
Yeah.
object like that.
It's also interesting to me how it's the majority of women are doll owners. And maybe because we're taught that growing up, I just think it's so interesting how I think intuitively too, a boy will just pick up a truck and a girl will go for a doll.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I wonder if there's some type of spiritual connection there too. Because let's face it, women, I think, we're a lot more communicative and more emotional. And maybe that ties into the whole doll thing as well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's such an interest.
Yeah, I think that's definitely possible, because there's that emotional maternal link too, isn't it? As young children,
Yes.
girls typically play with a doll and they want to hold it, hug it, have it in
Yes.
bed,
Nurture it.
and treasure it. Yeah, and they're the kind of things that even in adulthood we keep quite often we keep these dolls and we put them on shelves, and we keep porcelain dolls as collector's items. We do seem to, as women, have a link to them. So whether that's rooted back
Yeah.
in memories of childhood, but perhaps that emotion that
Absolutely.
we feel towards dolls might also be a magnet for spirit to know they're going to be responded to in some way in a vessel
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, too. You see a big push with those baby dolls that the women are buying and treating them like real babies. They're putting
Yeah,
them in carriages and feeding them and changing their diaper, and it's like bizarre, that whole
yeah,
movement.
they're called reborn dolls, I
Yeah,
believe. um,
reborn.
and some of them are so lifelike. I,
Yes.
I know that there are some people out there, because I've been reading about them, and I know some people have them in therapeutic ways, like if they've
Yes.
experienced loss or whether it soothes anxiety or something. I know that there's that aspect to it. But I certainly have wondered, actually, with the amount of detail that goes into these dolls. A lot of artists spend a lot of time making them, as you mentioned earlier, and they're made
Uh-huh.
to be so beautifully lifelike. Some of them, if you see
Oh,
them from a
incredible.
slight distance, you would believe that there's a newborn baby in that
Yes.
pram, and you have to wonder, perhaps, is there going to be some kind of psychic imprint from this activity of a mother perhaps
Yeah.
that's grieving or anxious, holding on to this lifelike doll,
Yes.
is essentially becoming a vessel for all of that energy and emotion she might be feeling. So
Yeah,
that's
because a
definitely.
lot of them lost children and then, through miscarriage or stillbirth, and then they go get these dolls. Have you heard of any of these newborn dolls having possessions or hauntings or anybody complaining about that? Or is it too new, maybe?
Yeah, that's one of the things. I think it's crossed my mind that this could be something we hear about more in the future,
Yeah.
because it's become quite a modern thing, and it's quite a relatively new thing. I have wondered whether we might down the line hear something
Yeah.
from these reborn dolls. But because I think of this timing, at the moment, it's not something I've come across yet, but it will be interesting
Yeah.
to see in the future.
Yeah. It'd be good for you to track that and see if,
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
anything comes of it. So in your book, you talk about several ways that an object can become haunted. And as we mentioned, one of them is the stone tape theory or psychic imprint.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about spirit attachments, cursed items, or conduits. What's the most, I guess, common one that you've seen when investigating these dolls?
I think that, I mean, there are examples of all of those, but I think the most common one is spirit attachment itself.
Mm,
I say that because a lot of the cases that I look at do seem to have active and ongoing intelligent responses and activity around it. It doesn't seem to be like a dormant energy. It doesn't seem to be like there's a replay of things around this item, or necessarily like repeats of something around the item, or
mm,
in cases of a curse that doesn't seem to be evidence of something extremely negative or worrying happening. And yet if there's kind of something that seems active
yeah.
in a current way, something, like Edna the doll, who's able to give you answers to a question in that moment that you're doing your experiment, or touching the light in lifetime and you're asking something. I think there's a lot of cases like that. That's what I've certainly
Mm,
found anyway, that there's more
yeah.
likely to be spirit attachments to objects rather than curse or stone tape theory. But I do think there are examples of all out there.
Yeah. Well, that doll, Annabelle, um, she's gotten like a lot of publicity. And I think in the past like 6 months, wasn't she attached to the previous owner's death? Like I read a story where like everywhere he took her on tour, like buildings were getting on fire and then he passed away. So
Yeah,
she's still out there wreaking havoc, huh?
I know, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because you have this case that we're all familiar with from the
Yeah.
70s, and isn't it just amazing how even now in 2025 we're still seeing current events being shaped or attributed to Annabelle.
Mhm.
So I mean, obviously the story itself of Annabelle is fascinating, but it's just as interesting now to see people who are following her journey now and seeing what happens around her. I mean, I think it's always a good idea to take a step back, and I would say this about any case really. Once you feel like you've got to a place where you accept a doll is haunted or a doll that's brought people bad luck, there obviously will always be the temptation to say, oh well, this and that's happened and this is the doll's fault, this must be Annabelle.
Right.
And I'm that,
Right.
I'm not, that's not for me to judge either way. But I'm just saying it's always helpful to do that, because
Yeah.
as a person who believes in these things, you don't want to go down the route of confirming your own bias all the time.
Bias. Yeah.
Yeah, you want to go through and kind of look at things with an open mind. But yeah, she's certainly been making headlines, Peggy has, and obviously that tragic death. I think it was Dan Rivera.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that was awful. That he passed at at quite a young age as well. But yeah, there were certainly stories as well of buildings. There had been a fire, and there'd been lots of problems
Yeah.
around Annabelle while she'd been on tour. So, you know, for such an infamous doll, she's certainly still making a mark. And it's quite similar to Robert the doll, actually. I love the fact that you can look at cases like this that are historical, but actually you're still seeing the reverberations of their
Yeah.
activity today. So with Robert the doll, he's still behind a glass case in a museum, but the museum regularly is receiving letters from visitors saying, we, took a picture of Robert, or we were mucking about or whatever around Robert the doll, and we believe that we've upset him because ever since seeing Robert, we've had bad luck, we've had bad things happen. I feel like there's a bad connection there. And the museum are actually getting letters all the time from visitors saying, please tell Robert that we're sorry, please ask Robert to lift this energy from us. And you can see it on, you know, all sorts of websites online, people saying, oh, I went to see Robert and I did this and I regretted it. And, you know, so it's quite interesting to see that some of these stories that have almost taken on a legendary status because
Yeah.
they're so
Yeah.
well known and so infamous, they're still having effects today, which kind of lends validity to their story and
Yeah.
kind of highlights why they were as well known and powerful as they are.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think a lot of it, like you were saying, you can just take your own bad luck in life and kind of navigate it around having to see Robert or you know, in a museum, because
Mm-hmm.
there's even stories of people going to haunted locations and taking back a pebble, and they would take a rock home from a location and then
Yeah.
have really bad luck and blame the rock.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, and like you said, it's so hard to discern because it could very well be, but then again, who knows, you know?
Yeah, that's the tricky question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that links into an experience I've had. You know, when I was researching the book, I got speaking to somebody online, and they said since discovering this particular doll in their attic when they were going through things in their home, they found this old rag doll, and they said they're convinced that everything that could possibly go wrong has been going wrong since they found this doll. And
Wow.
they said, you know, they don't want a lot of money, they don't want a big deal about it, but they'd be willing to let me have this doll. And, you know, whether I was being completely stupid, perhaps I was, but I said, okay, then, you know, send this doll over. I'll be open-minded. I'm writing this book, we'll see what happens. And so they sent the doll over, and, you know, the interesting thing is this person seemed very genuine. I don't have any doubt
Yeah.
that they believed what they were saying, but
Yeah.
I've owned the doll now for many months, and I've not had one single thing, even in my own little investigations to see if there's energy there. I've had nothing come back
Nothing
from that.
negative or bad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nothing negative, and no activity at all. So, you know, I'm not saying that the person was not being genuine, but it kind of lends itself to what you were saying. You can have this experience of, oh, I found this creepy looking doll. Oh, actually, hasn't a lot of things been going wrong? I bet it's this doll. And you can make that link and then start looking for it.
Yeah.
So, but in my experience, nothing has happened with this doll unless she's laying dormant and wants to take me by surprise at some point.
Oh,
Hopefully
geez.
not.
Let's hope not. Let's hope not.
Yeah.
I doubt that, you know, and I don't know. I tend to think that a lot of it is self-created. You know, it's like anything else. If you think about something long and hard enough, you will it, you know, you will
Hmm.
it to happen. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of that could happen with and on the flip side of that, a lot of stuff is haunted, is legitimately, you know, haunted. Have
Hmm.
you seen any dolls that went through like exorcisms and then were okay? Like I can't imagine why, you know, some like a priest wouldn't want to do one on Annabelle or on Robert or any of these troublemakers that are out there. Like, have you witnessed any of that where
Um,
it's been successful?
yeah, no, I haven't witnessed that. And it's an interesting point you make, because it's something I thought I would come across more
Yeah,
in learning about these cases, but it doesn't seem to be something that I've, you know, been able to find a lot of, because it's something I thought I would have seen, like stories,
sure.
accounts from people saying, oh, they called in a priest and an exorcist.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm sure that it must have happened to some people out there. It's just not something that I was able to, for now anyway, when I was writing the book, not able to find.
Yeah,
um, I think, you know, in a lot of the situations, the one thing that I have noticed is that most people, when they're faced with a haunted doll, especially if they perceive it to be negative, is that rather than going down that exorcism route, you know, people do often turn to outward help, but it doesn't seem to be down that specific route so much. I mean, people are wary of destroying the object. You know, people say, oh, why don't you just chuck it out or
yeah,
break it or whatever. But I think there's a wariness there because people don't understand. They're not quite sure. They're thinking, well, this is energy. What if I anger the spirit? Or what if the spirit's not attached to this object and then clings to me if I destroy the vessel? So
right.
there's a bit of wariness there. But they do often look to the outside rather than trying to face it alone. So I think there have been like people who've called in priests for blessings. I think that people have gone to mediums and psychics they trust to kind of get more
Mhm.
information on what they're dealing with, and binding rituals and things like that. But in terms of exorcisms on objects, that's not something I've directly come across.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I remember an old Twilight Zone episode of a doll that did you ever see that one where a doll was given to a little girl
Was it
and
Tina? Tina the doll, I think.
I think it was Tina. Yeah, she was awful. She tripped people going down the stairs and did all sorts of
Yeah,
horrible stuff.
very
And
creepy.
that, yeah, and that kind of solidified like as a young girl, because Hollywood really does propagate this stuff. There's so many I can think of. What about that movie where, oh, I forgot the actress's name. It was like an African kind of doll, and it had a knife, and it was like chasing her through the house, stabbing her, and then it possessed her in the end. And you see her sitting there with the knife. Did you ever see that one?
Yeah, I'm picturing it in my head. I can't think of what the name is.
Oh,
I'm
that
pretty
one was
sure
a
I just can't think of the name, but I can
yeah. I can't think of it either. I
I've
think
got
her
the
name.
image of the doll in my head, but
Yeah. It was that one was a horror, man. There are so many instances. And I remember another one. I had to be maybe 5, 6 years old. And my mom and dad must have had this movie playing in the background. And it was black and white. And it was this doll that I remember that it crawled. They had it in like a bassinet or something. And at night, when the people were sleeping, it would crawl out and it had this long thing that looked like a huge pin. And it would stick this pin in the person and like possess
wow,
them. And me as a little kid, I remember the effect that that had on me.
that sounds
See,
traumatizing.
it was. So this stuff, my point is that this stuff goes back a long ways where Hollywood likes to propagate this fear of dolls in us.
Mhm.
And I just wonder, like, and I mentioned before, could these be tropes where we are creating a lot of these haunted objects? Because, like, you go in an antique store too, and let's face it, we've all heard stories of people buying vanities that are haunted and take them
Mhm.
home, and their luck is just horrible after that. So, how much of
Absolutely.
that, yeah, how much of that did you run into? Not dolls, but like haunted objects where people bought stuff in an antique shop and they came to you and said, "Oh my gosh, I bought this dresser and my life is living hell."
Well, there were certainly cases that of people, individuals. There was one lady who I wrote about in the book. It wasn't necessarily that her life was made like absolutely awful, but it does kind of tie in with what you're saying. People are really unsuspecting, aren't they? And you just kind of in an everyday normal situation, and then suddenly you could be experiencing these really mind-blowing things. So
Mm.
I did speak to a lady in the book. She very kindly agreed to be interviewed because she's a person who restores dolls. She
Oh,
kind of works on old dolls to kind of just get them looking good again, or even refashion
yeah.
them to make them look different. And she's had a couple of experiences actually where she'd kind of had these dolls that she's bought, probably off cheap, like a charity store or an antique shop. And she's done work on them. And over that time, she's noticed that sort of paranormal activity is around them to the point where it
Oh,
convinced her that this is real and that these
yeah.
objects have these energies attached. Um, and it's quite an unnerving thought, actually, because it makes you realize it's one of those things, isn't it? It's not as big a deal as saying, well, I'm going to move in this really old Victorian house and it's got all this history there. You literally could go out anywhere and you could buy an object just
Yeah.
because it happens to look nice, just to sit on your shelf at home, and then suddenly find yourself experiencing something you never thought you would. So just the thought of that actually makes you quite wary. I mean, I'm somebody with the book I've written, it linked in with an interest of mine because I've always found dolls fascinating within themselves, even outside of the paranormal aspect. And I have to say, since writing and throwing myself into the subject, it does make you wary because I'd quite often go on eBay or charity stores, markets, and just pick up old dolls that I just thought, oh, this looks cute and stuff. And then over time you realize that sometimes these things do happen, and that there can be a
Yeah.
consequence to these things just from a really innocent decision. So it does play in the back of your
Yeah.
mind more, that you could
It
have
really
these.
does.
Mm,
Do you
absolutely.
have a large doll collection at home? What's your collection look like?
My collection, it really evolves because I go through phases where I just seem to have phases where I seem to find loads of dolls, and I'll find, a few on eBay all at once, and then I'll go to a store and find another couple, and then it will build up. And then it always happens over the years. It'll get to a point where it's like, okay, I've got too many lying around. It's silly now. I can't fit them on the shelves, and I've got them sitting on the sofa at home, and my friends are coming over and they're saying, oh, they're creepy, put them away. And so inevitably I always end up getting to a place where I always try and
Yeah.
streamline my collection down
Yeah.
to what I would call my favorites, and then sell some on. So the numbers change. I had up to like nearly 100 before. Now it's probably more sensible, I'd say around 35 now. And
Oh,
I
that's
mainly
not too
like,
bad.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
quite reasonable, isn't it? if,
Yeah.
if I had my choice, I'd love to have a whole room filled with dolls, because I just find them interesting, just as items, not necessarily always the paranormal aspect. And I do love sort of looking at the old vintage ones and the wonderful sort of artwork that goes into creating them. So if
Yeah.
I
Because it's,
could, the space and the money, I would probably have a
yeah,
house full.
absolutely. Yeah. I've seen people do that where they have a whole entire like room with shelves and there's just hundreds of dolls in there. I mean, and I'm sure that you can flip them and make some good money too, because a lot of them are very expensive. Do you notice the dolls? Like I have a granddaughter who's 8 now, and as she was growing up, it was dolls, dolls all the time. But the dolls they sell today are so very different. Like you can just see the evolution of how they've changed, and they're just not scary anymore. Like the dolls in your image back there, they don't really sell. Kids don't want those dolls. They want the fashion Barbie and the sparkly outfits, and I'm just wondering how too that's going to. Did you think about that? Like how that would affect the whole haunted doll? Because you can't picture, a Barbie doll being haunted. Have you ever run across a haunted Barbie doll?
I have seen um, an individual who has had experience with toys
Oh
that
no,
look more
kidding.
like modern
Yeah,
toys, but it's a lot rarer. It's
yeah,
not as common, and it's a shame. I mean, in terms of dolls themselves, when you look back to how they were created, sort of 100 years ago, the intricate detail in the clothes and the wigs, some of them even wore human hair wigs,
yeah.
and the Victorian mourning dolls, and just the beautiful detail in them. They actually
Sure.
look more soulful, don't they, in a way?
Oh God,
There's just something about them that they're just like little art pieces to me when I look at them. But yeah, you're right, the evolution of them, when you look at them now, it's almost, I guess, it's a sad reflection of how we've
is
become as a society. I guess in a way, we're very much, what can we produce, how quickly,
yes,
how much of this can we sell, and it's kind of made dolls a little bit less
yeah.
individual, a little less soulful. So it would be interesting to see, perhaps in another 30-40 years, how that kind of impacts haunted
Oh,
objects,
I'm
because
sure it will.
I think it
And
would.
what?
Yeah.
Yeah, what about that creepy doll, that stuffed animal that's out now? What's it called? A boo boo or I don't.
Labubu.
What is
Yeah.
boo boo? What is that demonic thing? Now
I
they're
know.
making them actually demonic. So
I know, it's crazy. There was just a huge craze that started,
yeah.
and I know about it because my son got swept up in it, and
Oh, did he?
yeah, and he was like, "I want a Labubu," and you end up giving in, and before you know it, he's got 3 or 4 of them, and you know, in the end, he had them for like a week, and much like other kids, when they get into their fads, it's already dumped in the toy box before you can,
Yeah.
which is quite disheartening. So I actually wear one on my bag now when I go to work and get some odd looks from people.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, yeah, but I think it's just the craze, wasn't it? It just went a bit mad there. Everyone suddenly, oh, I want a Labubu, and nobody actually really knew why. It was almost like it had been a manufactured craze, I feel like, because nobody could really sense, well, where's this come from? Why is everyone
Yeah.
bothered? But then you started to see on the internet people saying, they feel like there's a negative undertone to it. There were people making accusations like there was some kind of symbolic basis on Pazuzu, the demon.
Yeah.
And that, much like the toy craze itself, I couldn't really pull apart where people were getting that from, but I think it only added to the interest, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's what I mean by tropes, because I think that we're creating a lot of this. Like this Labubu thing. I mean, it does look a little creepy and demonic though, doesn't it?
Yeah, the
It
faces look a little bit.
does.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think that, because of that, it just takes a whole different turn and it just becomes this like haunted thing. People are saying their kids are getting possessed from them. Like, I don't know. It's crazy.
Have you read that online? Have you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. See, I've not
I
come across
have.
that yet, but that's interesting, isn't it? That's
Yeah,
quite an extreme claim of people, isn't it?
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what they're actually experiencing to make them believe that, and it's like you said, how much of that is organic activity that
Exactly.
they're experiencing, how much is they're projecting because they believe all these dolls are said to be evil and they're supposed to be based on a demon, and
Oh
it's
my goodness. I
yeah.
think you could write a book just about that doll. And like by the time you do the research, you could gather up all these stories that you're hearing and have a Labubu, whatever it's called, book about.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that would be excellent.
Well, the thing
Oh
is
my
that
goodness.
I kind of already started working on my second book.
Oh yeah.
And it's funny you say that, because even though it's it's in very early stages, so there's not much I can really go into, but it's a book about objects that are haunted or cursed in general. So rather than an actual focus on dolls, I'm trying to look at the whole subject
Yeah.
that I can uncover, because as I was learning about dolls, obviously just by the natural connection, you start to hear about this object and that object, and there were so many. I thought, well, this could be another collection all in on its own.
Most
So
definitely.
I
Most
thought it would be
definitely.
interesting to perhaps do a chapter in this second book about things like the toy crazes and the times where we've linked them to having negative experiences. Because I don't know if you remember the Furbies back in the 90s.
Oh, my kids had them.
Yeah. And people, there was a similar craze with them to the Labubus, with people saying actually there's something creepy with these, that they come alive at night when they should be turned off. They're kind of saying weird things that sound like curses.
Yep.
And, it reminded me of Labubu. So I think I might do a little chapter on toy crazes and how we kind of project these beliefs on them. Yeah.
I think Jack in the Box too. That's another one that I hear haunted stories about, and sometimes toys can activate on their own, but then when you see batteries taken out of them, and like you'll see videos of, hey, there's no batteries in here, and yet the thing is still, it's still going. Yeah, those are kind of creepy. Those are kind of creepy. So you interviewed, how many people did you interview that have actually had possessed dolls in the book? Was it a lot, a little? Like, what was that like for you?
There's quite a few, and some of the names you might recognize and some that you won't. I mean, I interviewed Patti Negri. She's the medium on Ghost Adventures. And I interviewed her because she owns a doll that
Oh goodness. Yeah.
she believes is haunted, and she's had that doll for quite some time. So I thought it would be really valuable to get her insight because of her gift as a psychic medium, as well as owning an item like that. I thought that would be really great to include her in the book. So I interviewed her and put down some of her experiences in it. And I also spoke to Jayne Harris, who's in the UK version of Help, My House is Haunted. And because she was heavily involved in the Peggy the doll case too. So it was really interesting speaking to them. And I also interviewed Anthony Quinata, who was the owner of Harold the doll. I don't know if you're familiar with that case or not, but he purchased Harold the doll because he wanted to have an experience of his own, wasn't sure whether anything genuine would happen, but he purchased the doll, and in the end, he had so much bad luck that he was
Oh
just
my
utterly
goodness.
convinced that, what have I done? These bad things that have happened. So I spoke to them, and a few other people, just everyday people like you and I, who either collect these things because they want to and they're quite comfortable with having that in their home, or other people that were quite unsuspecting and just it happened to be sort of like an accident of just
Yeah.
inviting it in their home without knowing, by buying something innocently,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
So there was a whole,
Yeah.
wealth of information from the people that were willing to talk to me. It was really interesting.
Oh, I'll bet. I even remember hearing a story about a woman and a husband and a wife who went to Africa and they bought masks, those African masks.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, and they were terribly possessed and like destroyed their lives. And, I mean, it can happen to anything, like you said. What about, I think it was in chapter 3 or 4 of your book, you talk about Edna and Bonnie. Why'd you devote like a chapter to them?
Yeah, because I think it was just interesting to have that experience, to be able to give that insight as somebody who was putting this book together. I just thought it added a whole new angle, just an interesting experience that I was having with these dolls, to show ways of investigating them, ways of approaching them to see how you could validate whether they were haunted or not.
Mhm.
And I just thought that was interesting. The book started as me collecting other people's experiences, and then I thought, well, it'd be great to try
Why
and
not for my
stumble
own?
upon. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's how
Yeah.
Edna, Bonnie. With Bonnie, I did have some kind of experiences that were quite notable, but it by far Edna was the one where it was like, well, there's no
Oh,
doubt
yeah.
for me.
Yeah.
Um,
You've done enough testing on her to
yeah,
kind of validate that there's something going on there, right?
yeah, absolutely. So I think, I need to go through, because I have filmed and kept a lot of files on my computer, and I keep thinking I need to kind of put them together and then start putting them online properly so people know where to find them, because it'd be really great to get other people's perspectives, when they see
Yeah.
bits and pieces of the evidence that I was able to capture. So
Does she ever do anything mischievous, like misplace your car keys? Have you noticed anything like that? Where, I mean, if it's a 6 year, I think you said like a 6 year old spirit, um, typical 6 year old girls do mischievous things, right? Have
yeah.
you noticed anything like that since you have her? Where, like you lost your keys, you can't find your earrings, and these things never happened to you before. Does she move stuff in your house at all, or?
Well, there's certainly been times where, the light that I mentioned to you was quite interesting, because I had a feeling that if there's a child spirit here, that she would be attracted to this little light. It's just a little
Yeah.
round light. It would only light up if it's touched. And there have
Like
been
a
times.
cat toy, right?
Sorry?
Is it like a cat toy where it
Yes,
lights up
that's it.
and yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it's really should only be going off if it's physically touched or pushed. And I found that quite a fun thing to try, because I thought, well, it's just fun to see. It's something that gives you an immediate result or not. So I'd use that with Edna quite a bit, asking her, if the answer is yes, can you touch the light? Or if you're there, can you touch the light? And there was a lot of times where I had the direct response, but there was some more unexpected occurrences with it. Like I remember being in bed one night and I hadn't used the light for a long time. The sensor light, the cat ball light, had been in the same position on the doll for a long time, and I'd just had a busy few days. And I remember going to bed a few nights in a row and sort of being woken at 2 or 3 in the morning with the light flashing on and off, on and off,
Oh,
which is
wow.
actually quite unnerving, because when you're not expecting it, when you imagine waking up in a really dark room and then all of a sudden that light really feels like it's really,
Yeah, yeah.
flashing and it waking you up, even though it feels like an innocent thing, there's that moment, isn't there? You're sort of woken in the middle of the night from your sleep to
Oh
something you're
gosh.
not expecting, and that was unnerving. But then I tried to perceive it in that kind of, well, if there is a little child here, she's there, she knows I'm sleeping, is she being sort of a bit mischievous and playful in
Yeah,
that sense?
exactly.
So that's how I
Exactly.
perceived that in that case. And there was times as well with like tapping, the room. I keep her in my bedroom. I don't know if I must be crazy, but she sits on a little shelf in my bedroom, and there have been times where I've experienced things that I hadn't before owning her. So getting these sort of little playful taps that kind of emanate from where she is in the room. And obviously over time in your own house, you do get used to what's normal noise for your
Yeah.
property.
Yeah.
So I knew that this to be something that wasn't usually there before having her. It wasn't a sound I was accustomed to. So, and that happened quite a few nights in a row, and still happens now occasionally, where I'll hear this little tiny, almost dainty tapping
Yeah.
around. Yeah. And I've caught her voice, which always sounds quite innocent and sweet, really, on my recorder, even calling my name.
What has she said to you? Has she said anything, like that you can make out? Like, was it a sentence or is it just words? What's it like communicating with her?
Sometimes it's like there is a few words, but it's really hard to decipher, but it sounds like there's something there. I've had a few times that are frustrating like that, where you feel like you've caught something longer, but it's hard to hear what. But a few times I've heard, a couple of times actually, I've heard her say the answer 6 to when I've said, what's your age, which I found
Oh, wow.
interesting.
Yeah.
And there's been a couple of times, maybe 2 or 3 times, where I've been doing recordings and I've heard her call my name out.
Oh, wow.
Which has been really interesting. Just a really tiny Fiona, like that, just a really whispery little
Oh my
kind of thing.
goodness.
So
Do
that
you have a video camera on any of your dolls where you record, like, if you're not in the room and you just want to see what's going on? Do you ever do that?
No, but I would like to.
Yeah.
I have filmed some of these experiments. Like I said, I do have the audio files and I've got some video of the lights going on and off, but I haven't actually done a thing where I've left a camera running, and that's something that I feel like I need to do, because it would be amazing to
Yeah.
get something in an empty house, in an empty room, to actually have something happen. So that is something I need to try, definitely.
Oh, I would. Absolutely.
Hmm.
I would do that for
Yeah.
sure. Like, I have cameras all over. And not long ago, I was checking one of my outside cameras and I caught 2 orbs, and I never ever caught orbs, and they were amazing because they were huge, and they were coming from under the ground, and they had like a direction. But it's just amazing now with the age that we live in, that you can capture these things. And I think we've all seen videos of dolls that like move their heads,
Hmm.
when you're not in the room, and dolls that animate when caught on camera. I mean, have you seen any of that footage or during your research, or like what's
Yeah.
that like for you?
Yeah, no, I have seen some examples of that. I know that Jayne Harris, before she became involved in the TV show, she spent a great deal of time. Like, there was a time where she would have, I would say, devoted a lot of her time to investigating haunted objects and dolls herself. And she was quite good, because she was able to document things, as you suggested, like using a locked off camera. And there was
Mhm.
times that she would put that footage online, and I followed that quite closely, because there was times where you could see the doll or items around that doll moving, and you could clearly see it happening. It wasn't a sort of, oh, was it, or was it a shadow? You could kind of
Yeah.
clearly see movement there. And there was 2 sisters I spoke to that I write about in the book. They kind of name themselves publicly as the Supernatural Sisters, and they study haunted objects, and they're quite good as well, because they know that there's skeptics out there, but they're great at trying to help validate their
Yeah.
claims. And they quite often put footage online as well, which I've seen some of, where they have some really interesting results too. So while it's not something I've done yet on video camera, and I want to, it's something I have come across with cases where I have seen it, and that always adds a whole other level to it, doesn't it?
Yeah,
To see
yeah.
it.
Oh, it sure does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you mentioned you're not like, in your words, what you said, like gifted. So you're not like psychic, or never really had experimented with any of that high strangeness stuff, right? So you're not psychic or anything like that. You're just deeply interested in this topic, right?
Yeah, it's just literally a passion of mine. It grew from childhood, and then it just developed from there, really. It went from just reading books and ghost stories to then writing about it myself and investigating myself. And it's just been something that's literally a passion. And it feels like, if I called it a hobby, it would feel almost demeaning, because you have some things in your life that
Yeah.
feel so strong and meaningful that it's more than just a hobby. It's a real lifelong passion and interest.
Yeah.
So yeah, no,
That's
I
why
don't.
I'm wondering if maybe, you are gifted in that way. And I don't know, have you ever thought to explore that? Like, I don't know, like maybe do remote viewing classes, or I don't know, like just trying to engage in your intuition? Or have you ever gone in that direction where you felt compelled to, like, well, I have this amazing interest in the paranormal. Like, why? Like, this maybe something, maybe you are gifted in that way and you just don't like see it or
Yeah,
understand it.
I mean, it's possible. It's interesting you say that. It reminds me, my husband said to me a few times over the years, have you ever wondered why you're so deeply
Yeah.
drawn to this, and could there be something deeper at play? And I'm open-minded, and I think it's possible. I'm certainly open-minded to the thought of kind of delving into it more and seeing if perhaps if there is something within me that a gift that I can perhaps unearth, perhaps if it is within me.
Yeah.
But then there's another side to it, because although I have a lot of respect for
Hmm.
there's a few mediums that I know and I have respect for their work, but I think there's something valuable in having somebody that's coming into it without saying, I'm seeing this and I'm sensing this, and actually just saying, look, this is what I found, this is what I've researched, and it makes it an even playing field. Then I'm not seeing something that you can't see. I'm
Oh,
I'm
I see.
literally putting something forward there that anyone has the ability to access and see for themselves what I'm seeing, and then for them to make their own judgment. So I think that's one way that I've been
Yeah.
looking at it. But in terms of a
Yeah.
personal interest, I would be interested to know if there is something deeper there. Definitely.
Yeah, that's a good point. So you're kind of bringing like a scientific, aspect to it, where you're objectively looking at the field and, taking notes and doing your research. And that's like cool because it is a different, you're not a medium coming with, intuition or prophecies about things. So I get what you're saying, and that's great. That's a nice way to balance it, I think, right?
Yeah, because like I said, even though it is interesting to look at it from someone who has that insight, there is something nice. When I've gone to paranormal investigations before, or watched TV shows with them, it's I've always found, for me, the most interesting thing is the thing I can observe myself or see
Yeah.
myself, and I think that just makes it a nice experience for other people that are either
Yes.
reading your book or watching your shows, that they can be part of that too and take what they want from what they're
Yeah,
seeing.
I like that. I like that. What about voodoo dolls? Have you ever had an experience with one of them? Or, I mean, you mentioned them in your book, and I find them particularly creepy because there's a lot of emotion and raw energy behind the intention of a voodoo doll. Like, they're created with a specific reason, and I think that's to harm, right? I mean, I've never seen a voodoo doll that had pink ribbons and kisses on it, right? It was always something nefarious.
It has that negative connection, doesn't it? And I think,
Yeah.
even when we know very little about, even for somebody who pretty much says they won't know anything about a voodoo doll, you only have to mention the name and they have that mental
Yeah.
connection there, that it's something that's meant to do harm. And I mean, I did touch upon it in the book. There is a few couple of pages that I went into the subject, and it turns out, there is a kind of a double layer there, a bit of a misunderstanding with voodoo dolls. I think they have been used in certainly in the past for like religious practices and for curses, but that's, from what I gather, not entirely the whole picture, if you know what I mean. I think that
Mhm.
much like with horror films with dolls, I think some negative aspects grip people's imaginations more, and then that becomes the bigger narrative, if you know what I mean. So that in terms of dolls in general, there have been dolls that have been used in with that purpose of putting a
Yeah.
curse on somebody, or it's been used in some kind of binding ritual or a religious rite.
Yeah.
So there is certainly a spiritual dimension to dolls historically, and that probably gives us that sense of nervousness around dolls in general, because you kind of start to look at them through that lens. So
yeah, it's so
Caroline,
awesome.
sorry to interrupt, I'm just really worried that I'm going to cut off, because remember I said I'm not on my laptop, and my
Oh
device
yeah.
my
Okay,
device
well,
my device keeps giving me a warning it's going to cut me
oh,
off.
it's going to cut you off. Yeah, because you're having a problem with your camera. Well, thank you so much, Fiona. Keep us in mind for when your next book comes out. We would love to have you
Absolutely.
back and further the discussion. Truly fascinating. And it was such a pleasure getting to speak to you. And I will put the link to where folks can find your link tree in your book. And thank you so much. It's been a truly a blessing.
That's okay, and thanks for your time. It's been so lovely to talk to you. It really has. So hopefully we can do it again, and I'll be a bit more organized with my gadgets next time.
Oh, no worries. We will do it again. Absolutely.
Okay.
I'll talk to you soon, dear.
Yeah, take care then.
Take care,
Bye.
hon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, that was truly a fascinating discussion. It certainly has held my attention throughout my life, as with, I'm sure, many of you. So we want to thank Fiona. Thank you so much for your time and guiding us through this dark and disturbing collection of haunted dolls. And after hearing these stories and all of your meticulous research, it's clear that it's a fascinating subject. Everybody's fascinated with objects, and it's not just about jump scares. It has a very deep historical meaning, and it touches a chord in each of us. So whether you're a skeptic or a believer, I think that this book will be perfect for you to read, because it kind of forces you to ask, when we discard something or decide to get rid of something, does it truly ever leave us? And what happens when the spirit within it decides to claim an object that is meant for only play? So, I mean, you might want to think about it. Don't forget, pick up Fiona's book. It's an excellent read. It's a quick read, and it's not only for doll lovers, but I think for everyone to enjoy. So, please leave your questions and comments. I'm sure that Fiona will be able to get to them. And again, we will have the link to where you can find everything about Fiona, all of her social medias. She's absolutely joy to be able to speak with. So thank you all again for joining us today. And you've been listening and watching us, as I mentioned before, through Ethereal Encounters Unveiled. And we are honored to be a part of the United Public Radio Network family and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network family, which is 105.3 on the Gulf Coast and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. I think I could say that in my sleep at this point. But thank you. Please support all of the other guests that are on this platform too. They would greatly appreciate that. So thank you all so much. Take care and goodbye.